Friends, over the past 7 years, I may have shared my unhealthy addiction of all things Lotus, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, the Bentley Mulsanne, while not exactly my cup of tea, it's always made my heart skip a beat. And in the summer of 2015, you and I had an experience to be educated beyond the world of Mulsanne and drive every derivation of Bentley Continental on the Atlantic coast of Norway. And through that experience, I learned that the least Continental of the Continental, the one with 4 less cylinders, was the best one of the bunch. So the folks and crew decided to send me another derivation of the Continental, but this one with a completely bonkers engine that kommt aus Deutschland. So I don't know if you guys are George A. Romero fans and familiar with the term "something wicked this way comes," but that usually is not appended with von Ingolstadt. But in this case, it is. So this engine has been pilfered from the Audi RS7, which is to say it is a 4-liter twin-turbo V8. But in this version, it puts out 572 horsepower, which comes in at a relatively high engine speed of 6,000 RPM, and 518 pound-feet of torque, which comes in at a stupidly low 1,700 RPM. But then there's a riddle here, and the riddle is, what does this 4-liter twin-turbo V8 in the GT3R have in common with its corporate cousin, the Porsche 911 Turbo S, have in common with a Buick Cascada convertible? That would be overboost. So for 15 seconds, there is more power and torque on offer. So in this case, it is 592 horsepower and 553 pound-feet of torque. Again, from a V8. So that's all sounds great, but how does that translate to out on the road? So before we dive off into this, we've got to go back into a little history. About a year ago, actually a little over a year ago, you and I drove the entire Continental range, like the V8 all the way up to the Speed 12, but not so much the car, but oh my God, we shot it in arguably one of the prettiest places in the world, Norway, along the western coast, the Atlantic shore. Oh my God, Santa Maria Madre de Dios. Anyway, you need to check out that episode, not just for the car, but for the stunning beauty. But in that episode, we kind of came away with the V8S was the one to have. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but that's kind of the impetus, if I'm being really honest, as to why I wanted to shoot this one. There isn't a whole hell of a lot of difference in terms of the reason why. I just love the personality of the V8S. It's kind of, it remembers that old joke of like, you know, why do you drink? Well, it intensifies your personality. But if you apply it to cars and you try to like do that with like a Hyundai Genesis V8, you don't want to intensify that personality. But here, especially this one that's shared with the RS7, the Audi RS7, oh my God, what a great personality of an engine. It's not so much the power. Of course it's a powerful car. Let's put our foot into it a bit more. And it pulls. I mean, it pulls really well. But what we need to understand is how it develops power differently here. And there's a couple of things different. We already talked about it's got over 50 more horsepower and 15 pounds more of pulling power. But really what's interesting is the overboost. Now that goes back to that old bit about the 911 Turbo S and the Buick Cascada. Here, you're not immune to the same kind of thing. So you put your foot into it and it's like an instantaneous bit of torque. Now, Bentley says you only get it for like 15 seconds, but I don't think you even need it for that long. So yes, out in canyons like this is the engine you want. But there's 2 other bits to this. Number 1, listen to this. Oh, not just a burble, but like a super loud burble. Oh my God, that sounds incredible. But on top of the burble, you get kind of a different engine sound. So really a burble, the technical term, at least to a Bentley engineer, is controlled misfire, a controlled backfire. I don't care what they call it. It sounds incredible. But what they've done is they've made the engine sound different here as well through a combination of different tuning, which we already talked about some of the different parts, but also with that different exhaust. Here we have something old, something new, but not anything blue. We got green, but no blue. So let's start with old. So this is a Continental, which is to say the engine sits way out here, but in this case it's a smaller, lighter engine. That is connected to an all-wheel drive system, which is in turn connected to double wishbones in the front, multi-link unit in the rear. Now to the something new. So that same double wishbone in the front and multi-link in the rear has been retuned for the GT3R application. And then the brakes, instead of metallic rotors, they're carbon ceramic rotors fitted as standard. So we need to roll back to the Norway episode again to understand another reason why I felt the V8S was the one to have. And that's the engine, and not so much from the pulling power, but it's smaller and it's lighter. But it still has a lot of power. But the big thing is, it's less weight over the front axle. Now, that brings up an incredibly important point here, and that's the weight. While this is a lighter weight Bentley, it is still not a lightweight car. It's almost like 5,000 pounds, 4,800 pounds to be exact. And it really can't get away from just the basic of Continental design, which is to say that more of the weight sits over the front wheels. So in this case, it's like almost 57% sits over the front wheels. But it's still an all-wheel drive car, and you can vary the power back and forth. Now granted, you can't manually do it. The system does it for you. But in the back, you can range anywhere between 85% all the way down to 35%, and in the front it ranges anywhere between 65% all the way down to 15%. Now just kind of driving normally, let's like slow down a little bit as you would drive around town in a regular Bentley. It's 60 to the rear, 40 to the front. But really the big difference between the GT3R and the V8S is that tuning we talked about. So you've got the wishbones in the front, the multi-link in the rear. But really what's happening is the Bentley engineers have kind of recalibrated everything, retuned the suspension, and now, okay, rather than tell you, let me demonstrate. Let's go to the adjustable dampers. And one thing I've always loved about Continentals is this great graphic they have here where you can just go in and dial in whatever you want. This is on all Continentals. And so let's forget about these like middle ones. Let's go right to comfort, and we've got some hairy roads up here. And here you get, if I'm coming around here pretty quickly, please do not try this at home. You get some squat and a little roll in the rear here. You kind of felt it as we got into that thing. And then you get a little bit of lean to the side, virtually no dive in the front. But then let's switch back into sport mode. There we go in sport mode. And we got a nice turn coming up here, so let's put our foot into it. Please don't try this at home. Downshift, let's go into the turn. And what happens is that squat, that roll in the rear, it's virtually non-existent. And then there's no lean on the outside here. So effectively the sport damper mode in this one cleans up all of the, I guess, the bad habits from such a large, heavy car in the V8S, which already cleaned it up over other Continentals. Get it? Now, I don't know about you guys, but whenever I see this on the steering wheel, I'm always looking for wood, and I have not been able to find a stitch anywhere in this thing, which means we are not done with driving dynamics. There's actually two things more we need to cover. Number one is the brakes. So again, back in Norway, we drove the Speed 12 Continental, and that one was fitted with carbon ceramic rotors as standard, and that has made it down to this V8 here. But this is a huge point. So carbon ceramic rotors, in theory, great for days like this where I'm just screaming up and down this road, which I have been doing, or on a track. But when you take them in town, whether you've spent a lot of time with these or you're just going from metallic rotors to these, they generally have different performance, or basically as a daily driver. But the thing about this is actually more usable around town, this type or this setup of carbon ceramic rotor. Like, remember that McLaren that we drove just recently? It's so different. The braking characteristics in town. Like, if you were to loan that car to a buddy of yours, you need to tell them that the braking characteristics are different in town. Where here, like, let's come around this turn, pick up the speed here, and again, please don't try this at home. It's incredibly composed, and actually working in conjunction with all those changes we talked about, you don't get a lot of dive in the front when you hit the brakes like that. But at the end of the day, it still gives you the performance of carbon ceramic, but what I've found is this is probably the best balance in terms of around town usability. Now last and certainly not least in terms of driving dynamics, this is fitted with a torque vectoring differential. Now if you watch that SL63 episode, was what 4 months ago? I can't believe it's almost June at this point. That is fitted with an old school mechanical diff, and it transformed that GT car, just much more confidence in a big car like that. Well, here you get much of the same thing. So let's downshift, put our foot into it. Just as an aside here, can I just say I love that these shifters are connected to the steering column and the steering wheel. I know we have had debates about this. Half of you hate it, half of you just love it. But to me, this is much more familiar than having them on the steering wheel. Anyway, back to it. Let's put our foot into it. Let's get a beautiful turn coming up here. And what you notice, really I shouldn't say notice, you feel, go around a turn like this in an almost 5,000 pound car, and now you feel the confidence to push it because it's able to get to the apex just a bit faster, just that much faster, where you would otherwise be in that guardrail in a non-torque vectoring diff car. It's not a huge difference. It just makes the handling significantly sharper, and that's in conjunction with all the other bits we talked about. And it's got faster shifts in the transmission, so when you're coming, again, let's go into this. We got some nice turns here, not huge. It's staying in 4. I'd probably want to be in 3. Brake for that turn. And notice, we pick up the speed. It starts to straighten a little bit quick to 5. It's a little bit faster than the V8S, not huge difference. I would argue the transmission remapping not nearly as important as the torque vectoring differential and the recalibration of the suspension. So in summary, what do we got? Well, this is one of these situations where I was reading about this thing on paper and looking at the stats, and it just didn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense to me. But really, this is a car that in practice makes much more sense than on paper. It's really not a cerebral choice to have like a super tuned V8 and an all-wheel drive Continental, but it works incredibly well on the road. But here's the thing. This is where I get to one of these odd like dichotomies in my brain, where as I drive this thing and very much enjoy this version of this engine in this car, I can't help but thinking, if you're already making a limited edition Bentley Continental, how about like chopping off the front drive wheels and make it rear drive only? Something tells me that would be like the perfect solution here. And frankly, that business case has already been kind of proven by a cousin of this car. So with that, I want to turn this around to you guys, and it is a very simple question. Am I the only one that thinks this would be significantly more fun as a rear drive super duper limited edition Bentley Continental with a tuned V8 from the RS7? And don't just tell me yes or no, tell me yes and here's why, or no and here's why. And for good measure, let me know what region of the world you hail from, and if you have had experience with a car like this. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all in word, MotoManTV all in word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with 2 things. Make sure you download our fancy new mobile application, which you can download for free at Apple iTunes or Google Play. And number 2, a fun fact. So, this car is named after Walter Owen Bentley. Walter Owen Bentley was not just the founder of the company, but a very talented engineer, and he also had a ridiculously strong belief in his engines and his product. So much so that when his engines were powering airplanes going into theaters of war over Europe, he actually went in the airplane on the missions. Really. Until I see you next time, bis später.